Hi, welcome to Portrait 2. We're going to begin with our local color background and our image transfer using a matte medium. And this is cadmium red light, titanium white, and this time I'm using a Mars black instead of a carbon black. And the reason why is because carbon black has a little bit of blue of an undertone and Mars is more neutral. And I wanted to keep my cadmium red light as warm as possible, and I didn't want it to start to appear like a little bit violet. So what I did was I mixed up my gray first by looking at my reference from Canva, and after I did that, then I applied my color afterwards. Now I'm adding my matte medium so it will make it more transparent, and then what I'm going to do is just cover the background, and I'm using kind of a wide brush, maybe about a ½ inch. And I like to use a little bit wider, but nothing too big, because you want to be able to have control over your paintbrush and your paint strokes. So it's good to kind of find it in between. You don't want to just like jump in and do it all at once. Okay, next we're doing our image transfer with our graphite paper, and I'm sort of just measuring it out. And it's always good to do a scratch test with your fingernail to make sure that the graphite side is facing down. I one time did an entire transfer with it facing up and nothing was on my canvas at all, so that was a little disappointing. Okay, so after I've kind of like figured out, I use my fingers to kind of feel around where the tape is. If you have a canvas, it's a lot easier to just wrap it around the canvas. When you're working with a flat surface like my paper, you really just have to feel around for the tape underneath. And this is just me, but I always start with under like the chin, under the jawline to begin my transfer. Totally preference. You can start anywhere that you want. The smart thing would probably be working, like since I'm right-handed, it would be smart to work from like top left down to bottom right. This way I'm not dragging, but I'm not going to be like smooshing anything or rubbing anything. So I guess it's not like that big of a deal. Okay, so since he has a lot of lines, facial hair, some unique details to his face, I'm going to really take my time and look for every bit of information that I know I will want when I'm painting. And what I'm doing at the moment is kind of finding the contour lines, the curves around his face, and you see something called hatch mark lines, and those are the lines that are kind of like coming at a diagonal right next to each other. That just kind of helps me figure out where different types of shading will be. And for me personally, I have a system that I do. So like for instance, if my lines are like close together the way they are on his nose, then I know it's kind of like a medium blend. If my lines are very close together, then I know it's going to be a little bit darker. And if they're further apart, I know it's going to be a little bit lighter. I used to do this more when I was starting out using transfer paper. Now I just use it every so often. No real rhyme or reason. I guess it's more like when I have a lot of information. Since he has a lot of lines and character on his face, I didn't want to get confused on what was going to be a wrinkle line and what was going to be shadow. Normally what I would do is probably just outline where the different highlights, midtones, and shadows were. So I think that is why I'm doing hatch mark lines for this specific one. As far as facial hair goes, I wouldn't recommend doing every single hair, although he has a lot of hairs that are very detailed, that pop out, and I think they do give a lot of character, and I love that about this photo reference. So those in particular, I'll probably, just give myself a line to let me know like where those are. But a lot of times I just put facial hair details as an anchor point. And what I mean by that is later on when this reference photo is gone and you're just looking at your screen, it's easy to get lost where you are, looking at your photo and then back at your canvas. So what I mean by anchor points is something distinct. Like if you see like a mole, it's good to really outline that, not just for the painting, but also to give you an idea of like where the shadows are going to be, or how the highlights, midtones, and shadows are going to be around that specific area. So think of like gridding. When you grid, you're really only focusing on one little section that you have to work on. Those anchor points are very similar to this, although we didn't lay a grid down, we're using a transfer. Those anchor points will still be very helpful to help you figure out those little spots. Okay, we spray our graphite transfer with a spray fixative, and that's just going to hold everything in place. Otherwise, what would happen is if you didn't spray it with a fixative, then the whole thing would smudge, because graphite is like pencil, and a soft pencil. And I'm going to save that thought and move on to our next video, and I will see you there. Okay, we are back and we are blocking in our values part 1 with matte medium. And what I'm doing is creating a value scale from light to dark with my cadmium red light in the middle. And on the outside, you can see that I created a toned down version, and underneath is a shaded version of my cadmium red. So what does that mean? Tint is when you add white, toned is when it's a mixture of gray, and shades are when you add black to your hue. And by having them in order like that from light to dark, it just helps me figure out my value scale and how to create really like nice gradients that go from one spot to another. And one thing I did notice about cadmium red light is that it dries pretty quickly. So I'm going to have to keep on checking throughout the video to see how my paint is drying, because you'll be able to tell that after a while the paint will start to dry up, and the best thing to do at that point in time is just to start over, remix, and it doesn't really matter if it's exactly the same because we're only using cadmium red light anyhow. And I begin every portrait by finding my darkest values, and I mean, it's not an absolute to do it this way. I think it's just actually easier to do it this way, because once you have your darkest values in, then you can start working from dark to light, and it automatically creates this like structure, shape, and it really is a lot easier for you as an artist, especially a beginner artist. Anytime you can come up with a process, it means that knowing what your next step is going to be means that you're more likely to complete a portrait than not. So having a process, I think, is essential for artists. Otherwise, you can get so lost wondering like how you're going to finish it. Is it finished? Not knowing if you should add anything else. And I don't know about you, but I've definitely been in places where like I feel so like, oh my gosh, am I done? I have no idea. After I developed a process from start to finish, knowing that I first block in my values with my value scale and my local color, and then after that I do kind of like a medium glazing color glaze, and then after that I do my fine detail glazing. This process has seriously made my painting like my sitting for a painting way faster from start to finish. I used to spend months. One painting I spent almost a year working on, and it wasn't even like that big, but I just only focused on one little part at a time, and then I would move to the next part and then the next part, and then eventually when I was done with the painting, it kind of looked like a bunch of puzzle pieces that were put together next to each other instead of a cohesive piece. This kind of eliminates that. So right now, like, imagine that this was a painting not just of his face, but an entire, maybe like an added landscape or an added storyline in the background, and he was one element of that. I would probably tackle that in a similar way, although I would probably do the whole thing in a grisaille, a grayscale grisaille. And a grayscale grisaille is just like, think of it almost like a black and white paint or photograph. And I do 2 grayscale grisailles in this class, and they are portraits 5 and 6. So if you're interested in doing that, definitely check those out. I would start off with a grisaille doing for the painting, because then you're only focusing on your values. And the values, again, are your lightness, your highlights, your midtones, and your shadows. Once you get that in, and you start to find your local colors for things, then everything starts to look like they belong. But you don't want to jump around when you're working too much, in my personal opinion. I know that there's no right way to do paintings either. I just found that this has been the most successful way for me to create realism. But by not jumping around and just sticking to, okay, today I'm only doing this, and then tomorrow I'm going to add a glaze to everything, maybe only using one specific color, but for the whole thing. Everything starts to belong in the same world because it's similar to the world that we live in. This background, all this environment is affected not only by the light and the light back here, but it's affected by the nighttime. So it would be a little bit odd if I was painting this scene and it looked like maybe I was daytime and different colors were like neon. But here's the thing, as an artist, you can choose to do that on purpose. But there is a difference between choosing a style than having a style forced upon you and it wasn't what you intended it to be. Do you know what I mean by that? If you're intentionally creating a style, like intentionally playing with lighting and color, then that is usually because you know how things work with one another and you decide to break those rules. But before you break those rules, you really kind of want to understand, like, how, I think I said it already, but just how everything works with each other. And I really do think that by the end of this class, you'll get a great understanding to help you, like if you wanted to start breaking those rules right away, I don't see why you wouldn't know how to do that after watching this class. Okay, at the moment, I'm starting to add in some of my lighter values, and I'm going to my very top one. And I think it's kind of cool about this piece in particular is because he has a lot of character to his face, that you can go really light and dark with your first layer with someone who has a lot of character on their face. And the reason why is because later on you can soften all of those wrinkles by adding more layers, and each layer is transparent to a sense. So the more layers you add, your bottom layer will soften out. So I think with someone with a lot of wrinkles or with a lot of character or scars, anything that might create like a ripple in the skin or whatever, it's best to kind of go heavy with your contrast with your first primary layer. Then afterwards, once you have all those contrasting shadows in to begin with and the really dark wrinkles where they need to be, then it will be way easier to soften it later. With someone with very smooth skin, as you'll see in the next portrait, it's best to almost not go so high contrast and really focus on the middle values. So like if you're looking at the screen right now, the middle values would be like not the brightest light color and not the darkest black color. It would be the ones in the middle, because when you're working with smooth skin, there's not that much shadow. The gradient should be very kind of close together. And I really do believe that that middle scale is where you find true realism. Let's see how we're doing right now. What's going on? Okay, good. It's rare that I actually do something that I'm like supposed to do, and that is cleaning my palette and remixing my paint because I know that the paint has dried. But it looks like I may have been done with my session for that night because I'm applying a clear leveling gel. A clear leveling gel just kind of evens everything out, but huge word of advice, and I cannot emphasize this enough, is to not put your leveling gel on until your painting is completely dry. And you will find out in Portrait 4 when I make tons of mistakes. Okay, let's move on to our next video. I will see you there. Welcome back, and this is part 2 of blocking in our values. So now what I'm doing is using a gloss glazing liquid, and I'm applying it directly to my paint while I create my value scale. I don't know. Well, so I've had some issues recently with applying gloss glaze directly to my mixed paint. But on the other hand, I do know that cadmium red light dries pretty quickly, so it may help me keep this value scale mixture a little bit longer. But what I have noticed is that by adding the glaze directly to your mixed paints, same thing with the matte medium, it kind of creates like a little bit of a clumping after like an hour. In my personal opinion, after doing a bunch of paintings using this gloss glazing liquid now, I would almost just keep your gloss glazing liquid on the side like it is at the moment, and your mixtures just keep it only paint. And if you need to remix your paint, you're just gonna have to do it. But it's worth it. I think it's worth it because if you remix your paint, it's gonna take you, what, like 5 minutes? And if you start to run into problems with your mixed paint with the glaze, then you run the risk of undoing the work that you've done because you're starting to make a ton of mistakes. So it's really like worth it to just do it right rather than being a little bit lazy about it, I guess. And like I say this, but I need to take my own advice too. Okay, so adding white to your mixture of paint, adding white to paint in general will make your paint more opaque. And I am doing that at the moment on purpose for this one because, like I said before, the underpainting was extremely high contrast. Now by adding in my mixed paint, my my valued mixture with the addition of white and glaze or whatever, by doing that, as you can see, because it's more opaque, it's softening those dark contrasts that we did in the last one. And it's making it already look pretty realistic. Like, look at the left side compared to the right side. And I haven't done very much. I'm just kind of creating my second layer. And I honestly think too that the gloss glazing liquid is just so good at doing this, where it gives you that transparency where anything underneath will still shine through, as long as you don't like put too much white in, or as long as you put enough glaze in. If there's not enough glaze and you're just basically painting acrylic paint, which is like high pigment or high opacity, and it dries really quickly. It's not like oil paint. So the difference with oil paint is that because it does take such a long time to dry and you're adding oils, you could like honestly use the same paint palette for a week if you put it in the freezer. And it means less mixing of paint, but also slower dry time. So for me, you know, it's acrylic now because I have very limited time. All right, let's talk about my paint brushes. So I am using a Filbert brush at the moment, and a Filbert brush is kind of like a flat brush, but it's rounded on the top, and it makes it kind of avoids those harsh lines that a flat brush would give you. And the Filbert brush is nice to kind of pat in your paint rather than dragging it. And patting in just kind of lets you know when you start to run out of paint a little bit more quickly, and helps create more of a realistic flesh tone, in my personal opinion. It's not like a requirement to kind of do my method of patting the paint in a little bit at a time. Everyone has their own style, but for me in particular, it has worked really well for me. And the other benefit of using this kind of filbert brush, and all this is in your materials list too if you want to know the specific size I'm using at the moment. But the benefit is that it's a little bit wider than a round brush. So a round brush, think of it almost like it comes to a point. It's very thin. It's almost like working with the traditional, like when you see a paintbrush and it comes to a point, that's a round brush, like the ones they always photograph. So it's almost like working with like a marker in a way. But because the filbert is wider and flatter and rounded at the top, then you can cover more space by patting things in rather than drawing it in. And that will fill the space in nicely for flesh, at least when we're working this big as well. When you work a lot smaller on your portraits, then you'll probably have to use a round brush to kind of make sure that your details are going exactly where you want them to be. You have more control with a round brush. But for working this big, it's good to find like a brush that will help you fill the space without like having to do like pointillism, basically. Okay, let's see how we're doing. It does look like the gloss glazing liquid is keeping my paint pretty wet though. That's a good thing. I'm going directly over the dark shadows that I created with a lot of glaze and just a tiny bit of paint. And the more we do this throughout the process of this painting, the more those shadows on the wrinkles will start to go away. So just make sure you don't overdo it, because you don't want to lose it completely, but we just want to get it to a point where it looks more natural than creating like harsh lines. Like you don't want your subject to look like there's just a whole bunch of lines all over their face. Really what we want to do is emulate that those wrinkles are being like pushed into a shadow, and the skin around it is coming out into a gradient that goes into a highlight of some sort. Like if you look at his cheeks, on the left hand side it's a lot lighter than on the left hand side. It looks as though on the if we're looking at it on the left, so his right cheek, it looks as though he is more in facing the light there, because I used a higher valued version of this cadmium red light, and then I used a medium value for his right side of the face, his left side of the cheek. So that's like what I was talking about in the last video. The closer you can get to that medium range of your values, the more realistic it's going to be. Plus, we're seeing the work that we did in the last video. All that underpainting is starting to shine through, even though we're adding another layer of glaze on top of it. And we haven't even added any other color yet besides this cadmium red light, well, plus white and black. And look how realistic it looks already. I think one of the things that a lot of modern or contemporary painters issues that they run into is that they want to go like, think of it almost like they're like a printer, where they just kind of fill everything in like you're coloring in a coloring book. This process in particular is the process used by the old masters, really focusing on the power of light. And with a lot of contemporary artists just trying to fill everything in, some of them just get it. Some of them are spot on, and I'm blown away and amazed by it. But if you don't see the way that they see, and I'm not meaning that like if you don't have the talent, but if you don't see the things that they're seeing, then it's going to be very difficult to create a realistic painting that way. I'm not like that. I need help seeing those details. Like I have to think of everything in a process, like steps. And that's how I create realism. But everyone is different. And I think it's also really important to take classes from other artists as well to see how they do it. And you end up eventually just picking and choosing the things that are right for you as an artist. So just because I do it this way doesn't mean that my way is the right way. There is no right way. Although there is a process that a lot of people use, and this is kind of a process that a lot of artists have used in the past because it works. So for me, I like to use it because it kind of means that I'll be spending less time trying to fix my mistakes and more time being able to focus on what the painting is or what I want it to be. What's the message and what do I want to convey to the viewer? Okay, so we are finishing up and I'm just spraying my glass canvas with some water and using a window scraper to get all that paint off. Must have been sitting there long. And I'm applying a second layer of this clear leveling gel. I'm going to give you a little bit of a tip. I put this on the materials list as optional because I ran into problems with it later. Again, if you want to see more information about the clear leveling gel and the problems I ran into, that would be portrait 4 of this class. Okay, I will see you in the next video. Hi, we are back. And we are starting our first color glazing with gloss glazing liquid. And color glazing, as you saw in our first portrait, is I'm just using the primary colors, red, yellow, blue, and I'm pretty sure this is cadmium red light, Hansa yellow, and a cobalt blue. And I'm just adding my white and my black at the bottom, and it looks as though I've already mixed in my gloss glazing liquid directly to my pure pigment. At this point in time, it's really like I don't have a value scale that I created, although it looks as though I'm kind of making one as I go. Now it's all about focusing on what colors need to go where. And I could tell that I wanted to kind of start thinking about the yellows first because it's already so close to the cadmium red light color. And when you add yellow on top of red, it's going to start to bring out the warmer hues of the skin. And in the picture, it did look like it's either a really hot day or it's really close to like a hot environment, because the way the picture was taken, there's a lot of warm colors in there. So I wanted to make sure I got those in right away. And I'm using, check out how little paint is in that glazing that I'm using at the moment. It's not a lot at all. Okay, so anytime you add white, as a reminder, look at how opaque that looks. So I have to add a lot of glaze at the moment to get that color down to transparent, that paint down to transparent. But I found a brownish color that I really liked, and I'm just kind of going in and looking for my midtones. And by adding my midtones directly over the wrinkles, it's going to soften those hard lines and kind of begin to create that gradient that I was talking about from dark to light. The dark is already there, so this mid-tone value is just going to start to shape it a little bit more. Okay, so now I'm adding some red glazes, and I'm trying to look for places where he might be flushed or maybe a little bit sunburned, or maybe some I don't know, just red pigment, and it will start to make them look alive, because if you start adding that pure some red pigment to their skin, we're really kind of thinking about the blood running underneath, the blood vessels underneath their skin that cause us to flush and blush and be alive and healthy. So I'm probably going to say this in every portrait, but there is a little bit of a rule that you can use to help you figure out which pigments should go where. So I found out about this from James Gurney's book, and I know a lot of artists use it, and I don't know where it originated from, but it has really helped me with my paintings, is that there's a lot of yellow in the forehead, a lot of pinks and reds in the cheek across here, and a lot of blues in this area, and a lot of it has to deal with not only the thinness and thickness of our skin in those areas, but what we see, like the blood vessels underneath, how we see that. Also, a lot of men will have facial hair that kind of creates like a blue undertone on the skin down here. And when I say blue, I really don't mean just take your cobalt blue and just slather it on down there. Another option you could do is like kind of make a mixture of blue, yellow, red, with blue being the heaviest color, and kind of thin it out with your glaze and maybe start only putting that bluish purpley shadow color in the areas down here that you know you're seeing those shadows, okay? Another thing you might think about is what is the undertone of the black you're using? So I usually use a carbon black, and I think I am using a carbon black at the moment. Carbon black has a blue undertone, and they do that to make it appear very black. And the cool thing about knowing that is you can really play with that black. Like for instance, when you're doing your underpainting, if you use the carbon black, you know there's going to be a lot of blues down here. You put that in, you get all your values, your shadows, and everything. And then when you do your first local color blocking in, keep that area super thin so that that blue will shine through and it will look more natural. Right now I'm using a liner brush, and a liner brush is great for exactly what the name implies, and that is giving long lines and fine details. And what I'm doing at the moment is adding in some very specific details and blending it out with a dry blender brush. Okay, so after I mix my color, I thin out that color with a lot of glaze, as you can see. And it's really important to make sure that you can see through the paint mixture that you just mixed together with the glaze. Because if you're not doing that, then it's going to be too opaque and you don't want to lose the work that you've done underneath. So look at my paint palette when I go back, and let's see what we do here. So I'm darkening the red, and I guess you can't see it that well there. But essentially, after you mix your paint, maybe go up and put the paint down there and add the glaze to that spot instead of adding the glaze directly to the mixed paint. Otherwise, you're gonna have to apply a lot of glaze to get that transparent. So I'm not sure if that made sense. Okay, so this is pretty cool. I'm using the liner brush to add in some of those like stubble, like that stubble that you see around like the nose and like around the mouth area where the beard, the whiskers are. And then again, I just blend it out with a dry brush so it's soft. So you can still see it. It's not like it's gone completely. But when you have more details on the face, specifically hair, pores, or whatever, detail should come forward, or detail appears to come forward and blurriness appears to go back. So it's very important to not detail everything, because then that would look more like a pointillism. And the reason for this is because people are constantly moving. Even when we're completely still, we're still breathing. There's still blood flowing through our body. And because we're constantly moving, the people that are looking at us are seeing somewhat of a blur effect. And we can pick up details only in specific instances where we focus on that specific area. So by knowing that, it's kind of fun to play with that idea and know that the blurriness will fall back, details come forward. So where do you think details would be good to be placed? It's really up to you as an artist. Sometimes you might want it to be just on the places where you think, and no detail should be, like since the nose is protruding forward, you would want your highlights to be a little bit lighter there. Another thing too, light comes forward, dark goes back on a painting. And the last one is warm colors move forward, cool colors go back. So by knowing those three things, detail, light, and warmth, you can really play with how things appear to come forward and how things go backwards. But anyhow, you can add those details on the nose to make it appear it's coming straight out of the picture, and then maybe blend things off the side to make it appear it's going back into the background. Or what you can do is choose to put those details and that information about lightness and darkness and warmth and coldness. Choose to do it in a specific area that you want to pull your viewers' attention. So maybe it's not for instance, since we are humans, our focus is, when we see a portrait, is to go to the eyes first. And Rembrandt was the king of kind of using this as his motivation, wanting people to be drawn to the eyes first. But since we are human and we want to be drawn to the eyes first, then where's the next place they are going to look? Normally how we look around a page is top left to bottom right, and then we kind of go up and down, and that mainly is the way in the English language, the way we read. In other parts of the world, they may be looking at their paintings in a different way than we do. But you can use your details, use that information to draw your viewers' attention to a specific area that maybe their eyes wouldn't go to first. Okay, let's go to the next lesson. Hi, welcome back. I can't believe it, but we're already at the detailed color glazing, which is our final step before we finish. And again, I have added my gloss glazing liquid directly to my pure pigments. And I'm just cleaning my palette knife before mixing the next one. You're probably thinking, how do you know where to start with your colors? How did I know to mix green first, mix a red or whatever? To be completely honest with you, I don't have a specific rhyme or reason, but I can tell you that by looking at my reference photo and then looking at my portrait, you start to realize places that are not looking the way you want them to. And that's when, in that specific area, you figure out what is it missing. Does it need to be lighter? Does it need to be darker? Is it too light? Is it too dark? Is there an undertone that I'm missing here? And what color is that undertone? And you're probably thinking, what is the deal with that green paint? Here is a little bit of a cool secret for you, is that green is the opposite of red on the color wheel. So you can kind of use this as a trick that if you apply, even if you did a complete underpainting in the opposite color on the color wheel, what happens is when those two mix together, you get kind of a neutral color. But because you're using green, you're kind of emulating nature and how light and color work when you're in the real world. There's a little bit of every color in different variations that gives us our how we see different colors. I'm derailing, but basically what I'm trying to say is that by adding a little bit of green into areas that you want to neutralize, or you want to make it neutral but give it a little bit of a zing, you can use the color that is opposite on the color wheel and do that. But I will also let you know that you'll probably still have to do one more layer over that, just to kind of not let it overpower the entire thing. And for instance, can you see where I added the green in on his chin area? So by adding it there, I also am kind of giving the illusion that there are blue tones there as well, that there's yellow tones, and the red next to it kind of gives it a really nice pop. But at the moment, it does appear to be a little bit overwhelming. So once you let that green dry, then later on you could go in with kind of a warmer, like our local color, which would be the cadmium red light. You can go over specific parts of that green that are maybe a little bit too harsh or a little bit too not in the right spot. And when you go over it, it's just going to blend really nicely. And it does give you a little bit of a realistic zing, like I was talking about. Okay, so you can tell that at the moment I'm starting to add in a lot of my details. And again, details pull forward and blurriness goes back. So I'm doing this because probably, let's see, how long is this video? Yeah, so probably what I'm thinking is I'm going to put those details in right now and let them dry, so that later on, if I want to do one more glaze over it with a warmer pigment or whatever, that will still pop through that final glaze, but that information is going to be there. Okay, so now I'm doing what I was kind of talking about. I have so much green in the face now that I'm starting to go back in with a middle valued, like warmer color, and it looks like I added a lot of white to it, and I'm pulling out some highlights and also kind of just rebalancing some of that green by adding red to my glazes. Yep, that's exactly what we're talking about. You see, now I'm kind of going over the spots that were a little bit too green with that red, and now it has that zing effect. And at the moment, you're probably thinking, maybe too much. Yeah, so here's another thing too to keep in mind is that when you work on your painting, the way it looks while you're painting it is not going to look the way it will when it dries either. So instead of trying to fix something that might be too green, do the work, like know that you can fix it by adding like a little bit of red to warm it up again. And then trust the process, because if you give it a night to dry, when you come back, you're going to get it's going to look more accurate to how it will look in a week. And then you will know what really needs to be fixed without accidentally going a little bit too heavy with your opacity. And what I mean by that is sometimes when you're working, you try to rework a spot because you think it looks wrong. So then you overcompensate by using less glaze and more paint. And essentially what you end up doing is painting over all of the work that you just did. Which means that you're gonna have to kind of figure out a game plan of how to get it back to where it was, or how you can do that. And what ends up happening is it is possible to save it, and it's not that hard to do, but it does take a little bit of experience to know how to get back there. So the best thing to do is, if you feel like you messed up, if you went a little bit too heavy with your paint one night, or if you went a little bit too green, you want it to be more warm, step away, give it a night, let it dry, and really see what you're working with before you make any of those final decisions on how to move forward. Okay, this is so cool, because now that we're getting to the end, you could finally add in those fun details, like the little whiskers around his mouth, the stubble, the white stubble, and doesn't it really pop? And I'm not adding pure pigment white. This is a highly glazed out white. And I know it doesn't look that way, but this is kind of a perfect example of the power of a transparent glaze. Is even though it is transparent, you're still seeing it. It's popping out like a lot, but you're still able to see all the work that you've done underneath. So think of how like liberating that is to know that information when it comes to like painting hair. Like so many people just think you paint it and you just create a highlight, midtone, shadow, and you try to like add in all these lines. Instead, what you could do is start off with your hair, like thinking about where the hair shadows are on the face. Start off by adding thin hair shadows on the face. And then after that, you add in the underlayer of hair with a thicker brush and kind of spread out your bristles to give it that hair-like effect. After that dries, and later on, you can add in your finer glazed out versions of your hair. And eventually what ends up happening is you get a layered effect similar to how our hair actually is. So the process of layering is really just kind of a cheat, in my opinion. A lot of people think that you have to have so much talent. Well, if you're only doing one layer, oh my gosh, yeah. You probably do have to have a ton of talent to be able to see how things change like that. But if you're like me, I genuinely could not create realism if it wasn't for a layered process. transparent layers really do save me. And like a lot of people think you have a gift, but really it is a skill. You just need to practice. You just need to like work with it. You need to know how the paint works in certain ways. You need to know how your brushes work in certain ways, how your mediums, like your glazing, gloss, liquid, how that is going to work or not work. And after a few paintings, you're going to get a pretty good idea of like how to play with everything. And it really should be play. Okay, we're getting to the very end, and I'm using less glaze and more paint, as you can tell. And I don't want to do it everywhere, just the only like the tiniest places that are really popping out. I didn't really have to do very much for his mouth, like at all. I just kind of put in my values, and you can see some of the greens, the reds, the blues all popping down in his chin, and that is just like makes me really happy. All right, so keep in mind the eyes are a wet surface, so having some reflections in the eyes, not only the reflection like the highlight, the white part, but think about the reflections of your eyelashes as well. Maybe you can see things like the camera in the eye. Think of it more like a watery surface than a skin-like surface. All right, we're at the end. I sprayed my glass palette. I'm cleaning it off with my glass razor scraper thing. I really wish I didn't apply this, and here's the reason why. It's so thick that after this dried, it kind of left some of the brush strokes on here. I really do think that this is one of those things, a clear leveling gel, that I don't think I'm going to use it. Like after this class, I don't think I'm going to really use it again, because I didn't have like 100% success with it. Similar with my matte medium, I kind of just switched to using my gloss glazing liquid all by itself. Okay, so we're at the end of this portrait, and I can't believe we're done with that already. I will see you in the next one.